Sorry for that. Just the House rules. There are business competitors on the working group, so to comply with antitrust law, please refrain from discussing about price or any discussion that would restrict the competition in the free market. Also, for antitrust reasons, this meeting will be recorded. The things that we'd want to talk about today, we'll do an overview of the results of the last meeting's exercise. And we'll also look at the results of the exercise and overlay with the theory of change that was presented as well, which was an interesting exercise to see where there are synergies, not only with the data that's collected, but alignment with the work that's being done on the theory of change. We'd like to have a discussion then about what data should be collected that maybe isn't currently being collected, identify desired outcomes of the pilot studies. These pilot studies, the original date to make recommendations to the executive committee was tomorrow, the 10th. We are extending that deadline a bit. The executive committee isn't meeting for some time after this week, so there was the 10th wasn't necessarily set in stone. There's a little bit of flexibility for us to have our meeting and get our ideas together before we do that. And then we'd like to discuss pilot study options. I see Edward, Marco, thank you for submitting some ideas before the call. We'll visit those then and have discussions. And then we'll wrap up by just identifying what our next steps are and what we hope to achieve over the next few weeks. Okay. So summary of last call, we'll say the last two calls. We did an overview of common traceability tools. Each had their own, they had differences and similarities. It was a great learning opportunity to understand what's currently being developed and implemented within rubber supply chains, natural rubber supply chains. Last call, we did look at what types of data those tools are collecting and using for either risk mapping or other reasons. And then we wrapped up talking about some of the challenges, how accessing high-risk suppliers and supply areas and getting that data can sometimes be a challenge, and the reasons why. We then did our exercise where we had over a dozen data categories where participants on the call raised hands to say, yes, our tool or our organization collects this type of information from the field level. And what I've done here on this slide is put together the ones that were the most common. It's interesting to see that there was the most hands raised around data information on the people within the supply chains at the field level, their gender, age, and type of worker. Also, I think it was the most common, looking for origin, collecting information on origin. There were a few data points that we asked about, whether it's a GPS coordinate or doing mapping, what type of information is being collected. But that was definitely the one that was the most common throughout all the tools. And then finally, for social, the most common that's being collected were information on wages, including income. We then remind you all of the theory of change, where the other working groups are really looking towards organizing thoughts and process in order to define the desired states. So this diagram, if you remember on the right, are the desired states that we're all hoping to achieve. The purple column are the threats to the desired states that we know of. Next, all of the orange are the contributing factors. These are the things that are contributing to the threats that can prevent the desired states from happening. And then finally, the intervention strategies that have been brainstormed are over on the left-hand column, where enhanced transparency, which is the focus of our group, is one of those. So when we looked at what type of data is currently being collected, you can see in the right column is where this is listed. The left are the contributing factors. So those are those orange boxes. And went through each and looked at where we had hands raised for certain data that's collected that aligns with these contributing factors. And the numbers in parentheses next to the data category is the number of hands that were raised. So we can see which contributing factors we're already collecting data on, and which ones that we either did not address or there were no hands raised. This is really just trying to understand where the overall platform is headed with these contributing factors, and also the threats, and understanding what our group, our companies, and our tools are currently collecting that align with what's being worked on with the theory of change. It will be important as we move forward with pilot studies that we're looking not only to enhance what's already being done, but also look to what's not being done and see if there are opportunities to improve on more data collection.
Gweneth?
I see your hand, Edward. Are you there?
Yes. When I look at the left side, the contributing factors, if I understand well, those comes from the theory of change.
They do.
And I'm not sure during the vote we had last time, that we had question on some of those. For example, if I look at capacity issues, at poor information on price, etc., I'm not sure we've asked those questions.
You're correct. We didn't design the exercise specifically for the theory of change. This was just more of an afterthought that we thought it'd be interesting to overlay and see where the synergies are. So yes, you are correct.
This is Martin.
Sorry,
yeah, if I could come in. Yes, one slight worry with the discussion there is that that's making it sound as if the theory of change is something that somebody else is doing, that this group then looks to see if it's in alignment with. That isn't what we're trying to do. What has happened with the way the different working groups have been set up means that each of those working groups really needs to be actually working out the theory of change for their section. So absolutely, you need to be questioning whether or not these are the right contributing factors in terms of why we need to improve transparency and traceability. And this is sort of about trying to have all the different working groups going through the same thought process. So you're looking in detail about the information that is currently being collected and how that lines up with these contributing factors, whereas sort of what would be great would be for you to be actually having a look at the threats to the desired state and really saying, where is a lack of transparency and traceability causing problems with us actually delivering that desired state? So it's really saying, okay, why are we trying to actually work in this? What are the problems we've got at the moment, so that then when we have a look at the type of information to be collected, there's a clear understanding as to why, because if we've got that information, that's going to get rid of this particular problem or issue. So please don't think that there are, there's another group sort of coming up with the platforms theory of change. The working groups within each of these areas have really got to sort of pin down, okay, what are the real problems in this area? So the capacity development, where is capacity not just low, but where is a lack of capacity causing problems to sustainability in the sector? Therefore, what are we going to do to raise capacities in areas that's going to move us to the desired state? So I would sort of, yes, agree that there does need to be at some point in some format a discussion on those contributing factors, because that was done without all of the collected expertise of each of the working groups has now assembled and gone through into more detailed thinking. Sorry for that quite long little.
Yeah,
No, that was helpful.
Yes, and I think that's the philosophy that we want to do and we want to have, and it's just to look at or to use this theory of change to help us to question ourselves on which transparency or questions that we would have liked to have to be able to have a full transparency. And I was raising that question, Gweneth, because on those, if you come back to your previous tab, you put in regard on the right side the votes, and when I look at the list coming from the desired state, there is some other places where, because the question was not asked, we are not raising hands. And probably some of the systems already tackle some of the question on the left. For example, on capacity issues, or as I was saying, poor planting material or poor information on price. I know that some system already have that we were talking about, that we are already using, are already collecting data on those.
Yes, that's understood. I think what we're doing here is, for the first time, just really looking at these concepts, these ideas, the contributing factors, what's currently being done in different ways in order to come to what Martin is explaining. That's going to shape our ideas for not only for the working group, but for our pilot studies. So yes, I agree. It's not complete because of that reason, but this is a presentation just to look at it in a little bit of a different way than we have previously, and summarizing our discussion. So there are gaps here, I acknowledge, where some of these contributing factors, the tools that are currently in place are collecting some data. So that is understood on this slide. Yeah, the next just broad overview, just to look at these things in a different way. I also noted the threats that were in that purple column, and looking at the data that is being collected and what data points really are aligning with some of the threats that have been identified in the current draft of the theory of change. So there is quite a bit of alignment here with what the tools are currently collecting for these threats, and just thinking about what else is needed that's not currently being collected, or what can be enhanced through some of these tools to understand how we can better get an idea of how to identify the threats within supply chains, and then how to obviously not only identify them, understand the risks and mitigate those risks through the pilot studies.
So if I can come in again, it's Martin.
Yeah.
Martin, what would be great would be if at some point somebody within the group could draft for people to have a look at. The sort of step between these two columns. So when you actually think about each of those threats, and this is just some of them from the current desired state analysis, to actually be saying, okay, where is habitat conversion enhanced or affected as a problem to our desired state, with there being a lack of transparency or information. So once we actually say, okay, what are the problems caused if nobody actually knows when plantations are established, where they're established, what the prior land use was, etc., it then is going to be much easier to see whether or not the data that is being collected really is what's needed. But that is perhaps difficult if we haven't really articulated what are the problems being created by this lack of transparency and traceability. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I think there's definitely these two slides were just really meant to set the stage for these conversations and to be worked out further. I think this is the first step that we've really taken in collecting information from the group and trying to see where we are at compared to what's currently being worked on in the theory of change, and where there are gaps and where there can be more assessment and into what is causing the threats and what type of challenges within collecting data or transparency in the supply chain are making things difficult to identify the threats or address the threats. So the idea here was just to have a discussion. We had all these categories of data, and maybe there's more. Looking at this broad overview, coming together as a group to understand what types of data should be collected based on the information that we've discussed, or where should our focus be on in this working group on the data that is being collected that either needs to be enhanced, or maybe there is not much data that's currently available now that we need to increase that type of collection, or design our working group into making those recommendations for the platform of what needs to be in place to increase transparency and traceability. And I'm wondering if anybody has any thoughts looking at this of where you thought there were big gaps, either within the theory of change, what's being presented now that we need to address, or ones that stood out from our previous conversations that should be the focus of our working group moving forward.
Gweneth, can you just try to rephrase and to explain more what is your question here? I'm not sure I've understood, sorry.
Sure. What we're trying to do is really identify what kind of data should be collected by the traceability tools. What were the ones that were seen as the most common and the most helpful that will then help us inform us about what kind of data we're going to be focused on within our pilot studies.
Okay, so in terms of ESG, I think when we look at your slide, it looks as if it's there. I'm just not sure about what is resource, and does this resource include what some of the traceability tools are doing, like agricultural data or capacity building data, or even production data? Is it all these kind of things that are linked to the farm itself and to the production itself? is it in the icon? Would you have it in the icon resource, or is it somewhere else?
That's a good question. I think within the resource category, we listed things like things about the actual product. So I think that would be the most likely category for that to come under. In our list, we had species there as an example, or the type of product being sourced, but I think that can be expanded to some of the elements that you're talking about as well.
This is Martin. I'm afraid I'm going to jump in again. Can I say that I think it's going to be quite difficult looking at any of these in terms of what type of data should be collected, unless we do go back through this process of identifying, okay, what are the problems and issues of not having the information, and who are they problems and issues for? So if we talk about the resource information, well, why? Who is it that needs that information, and for what? And what decisions are they making at the moment, which we're suffering from them being suboptimal decisions because the information isn't there? And it's going to be very, very difficult for us to actually look in detail at what the real requirements are on any of these, unless we actually really understand who it is that needs that information, what they need it for, and what the current problems are. Because I found it interesting, you were sort of talking about the objectives being the increasing the transparency and traceability. I suppose I would fundamentally question, is our objective to increase transparency, or is that just a tool? Is what we're trying to do to actually have this sector more sustainable and achieving those desired states? And that part of what we have got to do is to have certain types of data collected and available to certain decision makers. So it's not just that we want lots of information on all of these and for it to be available. We need to have the information that people need available to them.
Yeah, this is David. If I can jump in, I tend to agree with that comment, Martin, if you said that. The way that we've looked at it is kind of focusing on the most important issues that face the industry and trying to determine what resources or tools we could use to meet those challenges. So as a group and even externally, we've found that maybe deforestation is the largest issue that faces the industry. Okay, what can we use? What available tools are there in order to tackle that massive project? So maybe it's AI or some kind of satellite imagery. But then I do think that enhancing transparency and traceability is an objective, but we are doing so in order to give all end users and civil society visibility into a more sustainable industry. So traceability and transparency are a means of getting you to a more sustainable place. But I tend to agree. I don't know that the working group should be focusing on all the minutia of the data that needs to be collected. I think we need to kind of come together as a group to say, what are we trying to achieve? What are the biggest questions the industry has facing? And what could we implement that would help?
Great. Esther, I see you have a hand raised.
Yes, so I just wanted to say, as working on a transparency tool, that I completely agree with both Martin and I'm sorry, but I'm not sure who is on the phone before. That yeah, transparency is a means and the first step towards sustainability. So we probably should, yeah, as suggested, focus on what are the problems that not necessarily would be solved by increased transparency and traceability, but how increased transparency and traceability could help, as said, the end users, and who are those end users we want to provide this data for. I guess in the rubber sector, it probably would be the buyers, or like obviously every user has its own goal, but yeah, we also need to think about who we suggest what, because it might be different for a buyer than for a plantation owner what they need to know for in terms of traceability and transparency.
Great. So within the list of threats within the current draft of the theory of change, do we see something missing that your organizations are currently focused on? Would be a good question as well.
Hi everyone, this is Parul from Continental. Can I pitch in?
Yes.
Okay, I was looking at the previous slide. There's one aspect which is coming to my mind, is also about the uninterrupted supply of natural rubber. Does that also form part of the sustainability project? Like there could be some geopolitical scenarios, there could be embargoes imposed by governments on exports, etc., which can impact the supply chain. The dimension of geopolitical scenario in the previous slide is what I'm thinking aloud if we want to add. And do we feel that the sustainability of natural rubber also includes uninterrupted supply chain of natural rubber? If yes, then would we want to add it to the objective?
So you're saying of the contributing factors, the geographical political issues are missing from this list that could have an impact on the threats in the desired states.
Yes, and is that also objective of the project to make sure that the besides the socio-economic parameters, the supply chain, uninterrupted supply chain is also ensured? I mean, some tools that can also, or maybe I don't know if this is intended to be part of the project, to have uninterrupted supply chain and to also focus on the factors that can impact the supply chain of natural rubber, besides what we have already factored in the previous slide.
This is Martin. Can I jump in to
Yes.
say, yes, absolutely. That does need to be part of the desired state. And I agree, and others have pointed it out, that at the moment, the threats and the solutions that most of the working groups are coming up with are dealing much more with the environmental and the social issues, and there is a very, very large gap in our work at the moment about actually understanding a lot of the economic issues and the socio-political issues that, as you are quite rightly pointing out, could also address that. I would say this probably, well, this isn't something which is sort of fully within the scope of this group, but absolutely that point needs to be made, that we do need to be doing more to address some of the economic issues within the sustainability, because it's clear all three pillars have got to be looked at in an integrated way. So I would say yes, it is part of it, but it's not a part that we are doing adequately at the moment.
All right, we have more raised hands. Joseph, I think I saw yours.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I just wanted to make a follow-up question to Martin on the question of uninterrupted, supply of natural rubber when we are aiming at embargoes or national level policy. I'm trying to find out how this will work, realizing the scope of what we are doing is voluntary, it's not at mandatory national level, or where this can hold national level policy accountable in this case. So I just want to be clear where we want to situate this within the voluntary supply chain, instead of also trying to look at uninterrupted supply from national policy influences and among others. So that's where I wanted to find out from Martin if this is where we want to put it.
Well, can I suggest we follow this up offline? I think there is more discussion we need on this. We perhaps need to have a look and see if we can have some sort of face-to-face with people around the General Assembly on some of these issues, but we're getting sidetracked from this working group, and Gweneth won't allow me to join again if we spend all the time talking about the theory of change.
That would be great.
I do appreciate the topics being raised, though, because I think this is invaluable input into the overall work of the platform. And that's exactly what all the working groups are supposed to be doing. So even though it is a little bit off topic, it still is important to be discussed and raised. Parul, did you already speak, or you have your hand raised?
I already spoke about it, so
okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that I didn't miss you. Great. Well, I think the intention of these slides and looking at this was to foster the discussion and get us thinking about exactly what we're talking about. What are our objectives of the working group? Where do we want to focus our efforts within the working group, because there are limited resources? And then move the discussion from there into what our immediate ask is, which are pilot studies that we can recommend to the executive committee. So what we've been asked to think about and to discuss are the pilot studies. What are the outcomes that we're hoping to achieve from these pilot studies? I think will be an important next topic. How will they help achieve the desired states? How will they identify contributing factors, even if they haven't been identified already within the theory of change? How will the studies help overcome some of the challenges that we discussed in our last call? Supply chain traceability. And then, if possible, how will these pilot studies help to identify and mitigate risks? Maybe that's overachieving, but that would be the next step after thinking about how these pilot studies would help identify the threats. How would they then give you access to the information needed to implement mitigation measures within the supply chains? Marco, I believe I saw your hand.
Yes, thank you. I haven't seen the origin of the material in the previous slide. I think that's because it's obvious that we are going to ask them the origin of the material, right? Just want to be sure.
In this slide?
No, in the previous one. Yeah, this one. So
this is coming from the theory of change. If I go back, These are the purple column of the threats.
Okay.
So what I've done is sort of just this, although this diagram is very useful and for a process flow, I've extracted them to look at them in a little bit of a different manner. So that is where those are coming from.
Can I jump back in here?
Yep.
The original information on both the direct threats and the contributing factors were primarily done through a workshop, a 2-day workshop in Singapore, linked in with when the sort of launch of the platform took place. There was then further discussion within the strategy and objectives working group, which has really been focusing far more on the desired state and trying to have a little bit more discussion on the direct threats. But that is why I'm really trying to engage with each of the working groups, because that workshop did not go into sufficient detail, and these contributing factors are in no way comprehensive. But the idea was that we have now set up the different working groups, and that's why we need those, not to necessarily use this as sort of the answer or the process, but to use it as the thought map for what it is we need to, how we need to think about the problem. So this has come from mainly from work of about a year ago, that each of the working groups are now sort of being encouraged to put more detail on. They were then turned into a pretty picture, but the actual thinking came from the workshop, which had about 40 odd participants from across the sector.
Thank you for the explanation. Just wanted to be sure that the origin, since the origin is one of our priority, want to be sure that we're going to ask this information. Thank you for the explanation anyway.
Gweneth, because this is potentially taking a fair amount of time, and with sort of General Assembly coming up, we're all under a lot of pressure. Would it be useful for you and I and one or two others to form sort of a temporary little drafting group to actually do what's probably quite difficult in sort of a very large call like this, and actually come up with a draft of where really from your discussions so far, you know, the group has identified the particular problems and issues from the lack of transparency, and for us to put up a little bit of an Aunt Sally as to where we think the transparency and traceability fits within a theory of change, to then go back to this broader group for their discussion. But it's probably a bit difficult with these very, very high level documents at the moment, but we could perhaps pull together your thinking so far into something that will make a lot more sense for people around their microphones today.
I think that makes sense. The idea today was really to put that, to foster some thought process and get people thinking about what's currently missing, what do we need to focus on, what comes next. So I think that would be a good outcome, because it is a little bit confusing or unclear about where transparency and traceability contributes to the theory of change. It's not clearly identified currently, and I think this is the right working group to hammer that out and make it more clear and identified and identifiable within the theory of change. So if anybody is interested in working on something like that, you can notify me and we'll follow up after this call. And thank you, Martin, for attending and being able to give some of the background and help with some of the discussions around the theory of change. So the remaining of the call, we really do want to focus on the pilot studies and what we want to recommend to the executive committee for our what we think will be the most beneficial pilot studies to focus on and help achieve the objectives of this working group. So this slide just outlines the questions of what we want the pilot studies to really be focusing on. We want to think about what the outcomes are before we dive deep into what the specifics of pilot studies should be. We want to think about what is our overall outcome that we really want to gain from conducting these studies. And so I would like to open it up. I know that Edward and some others have already started putting some ideas together on the pilot studies. There's a little bit of a format here that came from Liza and Cobrat from the executive committee, where they really like to see our recommendations in this format as tool X should be piloted in region Y to gather data A, B, C, and D. And what we should do here is really discuss why, what will this help achieve, how will it contribute, and contribute to the working group and contribute to the overall theory of change. Edward, I was hoping maybe you can discuss some of the suggestions that you presented to the working group via email this morning, and see if we could have some discussion around those suggestions.
Yes, of course. So what I realized is that with the several meetings we had, it looked as if there is about 3 different tools, or there is a lot of different tools, but 3 different ways of tackling either risk mapping, either transparency, either traceability, either this. And it looked as if there is the pure risk mapping system, which I presented with Rubberway. The tool that WWF Myanmar and also our friends from EVA Connect presented, which is, I would say, a classical traceability tool, which they use, and the name is cropping. And there is like 10 of those available on the market. I don't know which one is the best, but what is sure is that cropping is already used by some of by EVA Connect and WWF Myanmar. So it might be easier to study that one. And then, and those two are really complementary. And even with EVA Connect, we are collaborating, Rubberway is collaborating with EVA Connect also to deploy the 2 different tools on a complementary basis somewhere in Indonesia. So that's the main, for me, the main 2 that we can try. Then the question is the 3rd one. So the 3rd one, either we go for another pure traceability tool, but that will be just the same, different format, but the same philosophy. And what is interesting maybe is to test another philosophy. And there's a lot of work that is being done with satellite monitoring for palm oil. And Marco also confirmed that Pirelli is having a pilot with this kind of tool, which is a very different approach again, probably more focused on deforestation and maybe less focused on the social part, because I'm not sure you can see the social with satellite, but definitely you will see deforestation. And so it's, again, another philosophy. And we have to admit, I think that the pure traceability or the risk mapping as Rubberway is not necessarily very efficient for, very efficient for deforestation, because it's difficult to see the change. And when you go to the farm to trace your production, the trees are already there. So, and probably they are even producing. So they have been cut off 7 years before. So do you know if it is forest or not? It's quite difficult to assess. While of course the satellite might answer that question. So this is why I think the three different approach, there is three different philosophy and approach that could be very complementary and that works to test. And the cost also will be, the way of deploying it on the field will be very different. The cost will be very different. The objectives and the results will be also very different and very complementary. This is why I was thinking that we could try, just a proposal, to test those three very different tools. Okay, basically that was my quick thinking before this meeting, and yeah, open the floor for any other thought or confirmation of that.
Sure.
And then after, the idea will be, if I look at the slide which is on the screen, yeah, it's just to I'm not talking very well in English. I'm very sorry for that, but I think we can just put in writing the point number 3, which is what more or less what I've said, but we have to write it clearly. Then on point number 4, how will this study contribute to the theory of change? This is more of a bigger work, and that, like Martin have said before, that it's a different approach to try to see how it can contribute to the theory of change. But I'm sure the 3 will contribute in a different manner and in a complementary manner to the theory of change and to improving the sustainability of natural rubber.
Great. We have quite a few hands, so I'll call out names. Gaurav, I believe you were the first.
Yep. Thanks, Kenneth. So I agree with Edward, what Edward mentioned. So these 3 tools, they are complementary, and as far as my experience and understanding is concerned, I think these 3 tools need to come together at some point for us to have, you know, a low-cost, high reliable traceability, transparency solution. I think what I feel is that between what we were discussing a few minutes earlier and what we are discussing now, there's a big gap. And to me, when we say pilot, it means that there is some sort of agreement, more or less, among the stakeholders who want to do the pilot. And I think before we talk about the pilot, we need to, as what Martin was mentioning earlier, we need to understand what data we need, who the data is going to be useful for. And this is particularly relevant for high-risk areas slash traceability tools where we want to have a high degree of traceability. Right, so that's that's one point. So just to summarize, so I think before we jump onto a conclusion to do a pilot of a traceability tool, we first need to have some more discussions on what parameters we need to trace, who those parameters are for, and how they will help us in addressing deforestation and social issues. So that's one. The second is that there are, as Edward mentioned, there are existing tools in the market. There are 10 tools in the market, but it is, honestly, it's quite hard to adapt existing tools. So if the requirements that we come up with for traceability are significantly different from what those tools can currently deliver, then it would make sense to develop a tool from scratch. And again, this might sound too big an exercise, but from my experience, it's really about the effort, because we don't want to reach a stage where where we do a pilot and then we spend time and efforts and then at the end realize that the tool doesn't meet the requirement. So in short, if the agreement that we come up with that this tool, the traceability tool, needs to trace XYZ parameters for these stakeholders, and those parameters, if the existing tool is able to trace, then that's good. Otherwise, we might need to look at a new tool. And the third thing is, I think it also comes down, we talked a lot about what needs to be collected, what data needs to be collected. And also, honestly, that's not that a difficult part. If we have people going into the field, then it doesn't make a difference to collect 15 parameters or 20 parameters, right? What's important also is to discuss how the data is going to be collected, because that's where the cost is going to matter a lot. Like, for example, what I presented last time, where the cost, we were able to bring down the cost because the farmers were coming at the point of sale and the data, the transactions data were collected at the point of sale. So that kept the cost low. But that again, that would be determined based on what data needs to be collected and who that data is for and how will that lead to the desired state. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's very valuable input. Let's keep the conversation going. Next on the list, I have Marco.
Thank you. As we said during the last call, so we as Pirelli, we think the most important thing is to have reliable information. So that's why I wrote in my email that I think the best way, the best tool presented and to do the pilot on is EVEA Connect or EVEA Trace, which allows also to use Global Forest Watch imagery. So it would allow us to also to mix the pure traceability tool and the deforestation hotspots looking from the satellite. And talking about Rubberway, I think that a pilot with Rubberway would need also an assessment on the ground to be sure that all the info collected are reliable. That was my comment. Thank you.
Can I ask, one of the things that this slide is asking is region. Would there, to do it globally would be a large project. Are there regions that should be focused on is another thing to think about within these recommended pilots, maybe regions that are currently challenging, regions that are currently on most high risk or of focus is something that we should be thinking about as well.
I would personally focus on Indonesia because I think this is that's a critical and complex supply chain.
Okay. All right. Next hand, Enrica.
Hi, thank you. My point is actually quite similar to what Marco just said. Just from my understanding and how we've at least been using it, is the satellite monitoring can be quite easily integrated into some of these, into some of the traceability systems that look at the value chain or the supply chain as a whole. I don't know how it is with Rubberway, but I imagine that that would also be an option to perhaps include in a risk assessment tool like that. So I just questioning whether actually having 3 pilots, one of them just being the satellite monitoring, is the most useful, or because Edouard said this multiple times as well, is these 3 different, I mean, I guess you can almost say different types of traceability tools are complementary. So perhaps as a 3rd pilot, it could be worth really using a combination, more focusing on that. Just a thought, but I do think it's worth integrating the satellite monitoring into the systems that are already existing rather than just doing it on its own.
Okay, I should mention Liza did send an email in her absence, that also raised an opportunity to work with high carbon stocks. They are currently working on a tool that will result in mapping of high carbon stocks areas over large regions. So not only the Global Forest Watch, but there's also some other satellite Earth observation tools that are being worked on that we can consider in addition to the ones that are commonly known, and to put that out there as an idea. The high carbon stock approach is also looking at possibly to incorporate some high conservation value machine learning as well.
Right, and then on that also the HCV network did their screening
Yes.
tool, which I think was sent out. It's been a few months that we worked on with them, and that would also be something perhaps worth including in other areas.
Okay. Esther, you're next.
Yeah, so I have two comments. One of them I will just start because we were talking about the regions and the risk tools. I agree with the previous speakers on that. Like I think it's a very good idea to combine the three tools, or like first start with the risk-based approach and then go into more detail and use those tools which are addressing those issues a bit more. And then on like and on that I think FSC as well has like a global risk management like not risk management, but like a risk based approach for countries, and maybe that is one thing we could also take a look at, because I agree that like taking a global approach, that would be a bit probably a big ask for this pilot study, but maybe starting from other tools which are already did the risk approach based on, for example, deforestation, and then narrow it down to those regions. And then on the other side, I hope I'm not like opening a can of worms, but we are talking more about traceability, and I'm a bit afraid that we are forgetting about transparency. So I think like these tools are great and they are very useful, but I kind of feel that like we need to define what we mean by transparency, because transparency of these tools are not, so like these tools are not publicly transparent as far as I understand. And then for like NGO groups, like that the company has a tool which their buyers or whoever can access, but it's not the data or the information is not available, is not per se increasing transparency. So I think we also need to think about what transparency we want to achieve or increase with the work of this working group.
Okay, thank you. David, your hand's next.
Yeah, thank you. I guess before I jump into my comments, in terms of transparency, I mean, I think traceability or any kind of mapping are going to give us data in order for our companies, rubber users, rubber producers, to be more transparent. Now, whatever that means in terms of the data that we share is to be seen, because quite honestly, we struggle a little bit in determining what let's just say, for example, the OEMs, the car manufacturers, what do they really want to see in tire makers in terms of data? Or what do NGOs or civil society really want to see, and why? So I think the transparency piece is to be answered later. I do think it's very important, but I think the bigger question is what and why do they want to see these pieces of information, and it should be part of the process in determining what we're going to track. But I think that transparency ultimately is what what are we willing to share and how are we willing to open up the supply chain to the public world. In terms of our, how I see this approach unfolding, honestly, I would rather this working group focus on the process and not necessarily a specific product at this point in time. The reason I say that is because we've got a lot of issues at hand. Some of them are in practice today, but they may or may not give us the end product that we need. So in terms of focusing on process, and when we look at the large environmental societal issues at hand, I do agree that implementing some kind of technology that does not require high acceptance in the market right now, such as satellite imagery. We don't have to go down to the small order level in order to implement satellite imagery. That's something that, anyone can do on their own, or they could, if they have access to satellites, they could do. So the acceptance is needed is very low in that area. That could be a first step. Second step is to map out the supply chain, and again, not necessarily focusing on a product, but perhaps the working group could canvass the available products that are in the industry, not just natural rubber, but in other agricultural products, and choose the best one that's available. And then at that point in time, we focus on high risk areas. So my concern is if we focus on one product, we perhaps lose the capability of another product that's out there that can give us more traceability and more information. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does. All right, we have one more hand, and then we'll sort of summarize some of the discussions and that's Suphan. You're muted. There we go.
Yeah, sorry for that. Thanks. Actually, this is just to add on to what David was saying. I exactly endorse what he was actually saying, but also another two tools you may use in terms of benchmarking and looking into how the other schemes are actually being done. One tool would actually be GRASS. So GRASS is actually introduced by ISCC, that's for biofuels. So they have a very good risk assessment setup, which you can upload the KML files, and it gives all the data for all the countries. That is because what we have seen from experience in auditing, and likewise, even though there's country-specific risk assessments available, it differs from eco-region to site-specific level. It changes a lot. So one of the tools that we see, which is quite complete, is actually GRASS. It also still has a lot of way to go, but that assess the land use change, the peat, as well as the high carbon stocks and the HCV areas. Everything is there. And in terms of data sharing, that may be a sensitive thing for most of the companies because they would like to choose which ones they would like to share the data with, and which type of information to be shared. So one of the exchanges that which is commonly used is SEDEX. It's a Supply Ethical Data Exchange. So that's a social auditing, social ethical database sharing. So there you have the options, which buyers you want to share the data. Likewise, so it's only from the concerned party. So the privacy of the information is quite in line with the GDPR and the other regulatory mechanisms which are available. So maybe when we move ahead, those are also good tools to look into. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Okay, and Edward, what I'm hearing, just for a comment from some of the comments that have been raised, maybe one of the pilot studies we're suggesting is not in this format and is more of an assessment of existing tools in other sectors. that can be learned from, which we definitely were thinking about when we're coming together with this working group. I haven't spent much time on outside of natural rubber within these calls. And I think that's definitely something that we can do. Our ideas don't have to fit this model. We can think outside the box and recommend outside the box to say, what would benefit this group and the platform in general is learning from other industries and what they're doing or other initiatives. So we can think about that as well. Edward, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. When I hear all the comment, I think there is something that we don't have to forget. Choosing a tool, I'm not sure, but some of the colleagues mentioned that it's not necessarily very important or that we choose a tool right now. This is why I was proposing 3 different systems. It's more the philosophy of each system, what each system can deliver, and also what it takes to deploy it. You can say, okay, I want 25 satellite with a live or near live follow-up of all the farm in the world, plus tracking 6 million farmers and 6 million transactions every week. We can ask that, and that's probably the best tool. Now, are we ready for that? And are we ready to adopt these kind of things with the cost that it represents? So this is why the different approach, it's very important to see what are the philosophy, what we want to achieve with those tools, and what does it mean in terms of adoption and cost. And the various, after that, the traceability tool is tailor-made, like Gaurav was saying, or is cropping, or is other traceability tool, or that you use this satellite or another one, or that you couple it or not, or that you have a risk mapping, which is GRASS, which is a global risk mapping per country, or that is risk specific, like, or commodity specific, like Rubberway. The 3 different things will have different output, will solve different problem, and will have a huge different implication in terms of deployment, and also the time we will reach there. As David was saying, it might take some time to reach, and some may take a long time. And what do we want? So this is why, instead of talking about which tool, it's more which kind of system we want to do. And then we do a pilot. If it is a pilot in cropping, for traceability with cropping, and that at the end we see, yeah, okay, traceability is great, it's feasible on the field. This is about the cost. Now the tool cropping is not really perfect for Rubberway, so let's go for the Cultiva tool, or let's go for an in-house tool. We do it. It's not a big deal. The tool is just actually the tool is really not a problem. The thing is that what do we want as a solution, and I think we have to keep that in mind.
So
Great.
So I think the important thing is that the existing tools should not guide us how the rubber needs to be traced or how the sector needs to be transparent. What needs to happen is we need to agree on what level of transparency and traceability we want. And we can segregate that for different areas, for high risk areas, for low risk areas. What we want to trace, how we are going to trace it, what information we get, what information is shareable among competitors, what information is not shareable among competitors. So once that design is ready, then we can look for the tools. If they are available, if any tools comes closer to that requirement, then we pilot that. If not, then it needs to be developed from scratch. Sorry.
Great, thank you, Joseph. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just following up quickly on what Eduard and Gaurav said. It's just the summary of it, and I mean, it's very key and important issues we look at. But what I want to say here is that though within our desired state, you cannot clearly pick where, I mean, in the supply chain management and the transparency is located. Definitely, we can infer at this level that we would need this in terms of, I mean, tracking what we have agreed or required to achieve in terms of supply chain management and other desired state requirements. So even if we are not there now, still we have a feeling of where most of the issues that are. So before even we go for this even, I mean, pilot, we can do some quick of, I mean, desk, I mean, research, just like the presentations we've had from the other systems, and see the gaps within each of these tools compared to our desired state when we also think of maybe laying on issue of, say, transparency in terms of how we are tracking what we said we will achieve and how we are going to communicate this. The point that also I want to add here is that some I've forgotten exactly, but somebody mentioned that yes, we have a number of issues now that so we have to stay within. Yeah, that is fine, but then transparency is about how we objectively communicate this outside, even if there are problems, how we are solving them. It does not necessarily mean that transparency, we declare that, yeah, we've done everything right. So, I mean, these are some of the areas that these, I mean, traceability tools can help us also with this communication, and how we communicate will really be one of the key issues of transparency. And I want to also make this point here in terms of the tools, like Gaurav said, at what level of traceability do we want? If we look at the, for example, the accountability framework initiative tools, and you look at the supply chain management, there are some areas that you might not necessarily need to go deeper, taking of risk. But here I'm defining risk in terms of when we look at the commodities or the supply. For instance, where you have a large number of smallholders, where these smallholders are schemed or attached or aggregated in a way that are more regulated by organization or a cooperative. Definitely, you might not necessarily, or our traceability, though we are here to define our supply chain management procedure and all that things, but you might not necessarily need to get to the on-farm details of each farmer, I mean, as a supplier. Definitely, you take this cooperative as a low risk. The cooperative, by their nature, should be auditing their or checking with their individual members, and they know to the farm level. So you can track your or you can trace to that level. So this becomes an example of low risk. So as we discuss this, I think we can also pick some of these procedures, products, as I mentioned, like the accountability framework, as a starting point of some of the way that we have to go with it, traceability and transparency. Thank you.
Can I just chip in? I'm Kavik from GPSNR.
Sure.
Yeah. So just to share with you the progress of our trial. I mean, as Edward mentioned in his email earlier this year, I think as of today we've mapped about close to 1,100
I'm so sorry.
farmers.
I'm having a very hard time to understand your coverage. Do you mind going closer to your microphone?
Is this better?
I don't know yet. Maybe.
Is this better?
Yes. Yes.
Is
Thank
this,
you.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
better. Thank you.
Yeah. So we've mapped about 1,100 farmers over 6 months, and there's a cost element involved to it. So it is something that we need to explore. And I think we also need to think about the bigger picture of scalability of these solutions. So I think these two elements are quite important. And of course, like what Edward and Joseph mentioned earlier, I think we need to be clear on what we want to achieve and at what level of traceability we want, essentially within the supply chain. So these are very important questions we need to have very clear answers to before we decide on what we want to embark on. It could be a single tool, or it could be multiple tools, like how we are running Rubberway complementary to Crop-In right now, because we are getting different answers, and it's quite interesting to see the types of responses we get. And when we analyze the data, some interesting correlations. So it's quite interesting to know, but I can't share that at the moment with the group right now. But once we are able to share that publicly, I think it'll be very interesting to see the type of data that we collect. So this is just my few thoughts that I wanted to share with the group.
Okay, David, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I think my final comment maybe for the morning is, I think from talking with industry experts and traceability, transparency experts, and I think it was mentioned just a minute ago, I don't know that one tool is going to be the end-all answer, because when you talk about satellite imagery and you talk about information on traceability, I don't know that you can integrate fully into one tool. So I would almost rather we, or would maybe propose to the group that the questions on the brainstorming ideas, or the questions that we go back to the executive committee, or the statements that we want to go forward with, be a little bit different in terms of how we're going to approach this project. And the whys are more so how and why we're going to step our way through the process, instead of suggesting piloting a specific tool. I do agree, Edward, to your comment that like you said, you were suggesting a couple of different options, which I think are great. I think that also we do need to look at what else is out there in the industry that could help us, that could be more easily inserted into the supply chain at a better, more efficient cost, or more easily adaptable into the industry. So, and I also agree, I think it was with Joseph's comment in terms of transparency. I think it's fine, and I think we all agree, and this is the reason why we're all getting together, is I don't think any end user or any producer or smallholder is really where they want this natural rubber industry to be in terms of sustainability. So we all agree that we have some future ideal state. So it's okay, to be transparent about, this is some data set, this is not where we want to be, but in terms of being transparent and honest with the industry, this is where we are. Now, I do think one of the biggest things, and one of the advantages of having multiple stakeholder groups within the platform, is understanding exactly from civil society and even perhaps OEMs that sit on this GPSNR, is to understand exactly what they wish. What kind of data do they want to see? Again, not to get into any business situations, but what kind of transparency do they want exactly? Because I don't think they want to see individual transactions, smallholder A to dealer B to dealer C to producer. I don't think they want to see that. I think they want to see that the companies that are selling them tires are transparent and are acting in a way that is sustainable. Now, what does that mean in terms of data? I think we need to ask those questions.
Okay, thank you. We are wrapping up. I want to summarize a little bit of what I'm hearing. It sounds like we want to go to the executive committee and suggest a little bit outside of what the ask was for our working group right now for this pilot study, which I think is fine. And I've heard Liza speak about this earlier, which she does as well. Maybe that what's being asked of this tool actually be piloted in Region Y is very specific and is the end game. And there's some studies that need to be done initially in order to get to that place so that we're more informed about what currently exists in other sectors or even more so within the rubber sector. But also this almost survey kind of analysis on what the expectations of stakeholders are for the industry in terms of transparency and traceability. Because that would help inform us of what the existing tools, what the components need to be and what the outcomes and the publicly available information from those tools need to be in order to demonstrate sustainability within our supply chains. See if we have any comments to add to that, because it will be my job to really summarize this and meet with the committee in order to have these recommendations and discuss these next steps for our working group. See, maybe I did a good job at summarizing here. No one has any comments to that.
This is David. I think you did a good job in summarizing.
I think, yeah, that's always been the challenge within my, I'm very new to this working group. That's something that I'm always searching for is but what exactly do you want the outcome to be, giving us more direction on that. And if there isn't direction, then maybe the pilot studies need to be focused on that so that we can meet expectations. Okay, if there are any final comments, please do so now. I do want to mention, I think one of the things that we did discuss, when we talk about tools, a lot of our discussions have been around the traceability tools, or as Edward was saying, the types and philosophy of the traceability tools or the systems. We should probably think, and it's been mentioned, maybe the tool in this case isn't necessarily the traceability, it's the data set or the mapping or satellite tool that's used to overlay on the existing traceability systems that could also be invested in within a pilot study and tested on current types of systems. So that's also within that list of just thinking about the tool, not necessarily maybe the traceability tool, but the data set layer or the mapping tool or something a bit broader around a specific issue or threat at hand, like conversion, or like high carbon stocks or high conservation values that these studies can take advantage of and focus on, and therefore contribute to something that's already being worked on. Okay, next steps, we have a placeholder, I believe, for the 22nd of January. I will connect with Cobra and confirm. We'll keep the same time. I'm just not sure about the schedule for the other meetings, which she definitely has a handle on, and we'll communicate to the group for 2 weeks' time. In between, I'll do some meetings and discussions with Olivier and Cobra and Stefano and probably Martin as well, to look at the outcome of this call, look at the notes, the recordings, the conversations, to pull out the main themes of what was discussed and what we see as the next step forward is, and what our recommendations therefore will be to the executive committee. And we can then come back together to discuss and have agreement for those plans. All right, we are exactly on time, which is amazing. I think this was very helpful. Sometimes we feel a little bit lost within our discussions. Everybody's input has been extremely helpful. We definitely are in an innovative thought process right now of trying to take into all these factors of the theory of change, of the working group objectives, of all the different moving pieces, and continue to think about those as we continue to fine tune and narrow in on what exactly these pilot studies and what the focus of our working group will be and how it will contribute to the broader initiative. So I think although we seem to be still very, not unorganized, but still definitely still in thought process or exploratory phase, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think we're moving more and more to a concise plan that everybody's in agreement to, even though there's a little bit of difference. It does sound like overall the working group is aligned on what we hope to achieve.
Thanks, Kenneth, and also for coordinating it so well.
It's a challenge.
Thank you, Gweneth.
Hopefully I'm trying to be facilitator as much as possible and get thought process and discussions moving. So hopefully it's going well. And if anybody has any input or any thoughts on how to lead next calls, definitely send them to me. I am more than open to hearing other people's ideas. With that, we'll close this session and close the call, and we'll be following up with notes and more information on next steps.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye bye. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.